When in Ireland, try some new stuff and check out some new distilleries. All right, I will get more specific than that. But first, we have to address the fact that this is back to being a weekly podcast, which I am thrilled about. That would absolutely not be possible without the support of the patrons. And I mean that fully because of the response that the Patreon initially got, I was able, among other things, I was able to decide, okay, I'm going to try to make this a full-time commitment. Now I'm doing all of the Whiskey Noobs content full-time. That is possible only because of the patrons, which I can't thank you guys enough. That being said, if you want to support that, if you want to keep this a weekly podcast, please go check out the Patreon. The initial support that we got gave me the confidence. I was like, if we keep this trajectory, we're going to be in good shape. But if we don't keep that trajectory, this won't continue to be possible. Just being completely and totally transparent with you guys. So, I also have other business endeavors, of course, that I'm also working to ramp up. But if you want to support the show, the best way, the absolute best way to support this show is by joining the Patreon page. Please go check it out. We have fully revamped the Patreon page. I'm not going to dive into the details and bore all you guys, but basically we've got barrel picks now. We've got community stuff going on like virtual meetups, in-person meetups if we can swing it, if we can get enough people interested. We've got bonus podcast episodes. If you like the podcast, you're going to get an extra episode every month in certain tiers on the Patreon page. So I cannot thank you guys enough for your support so far. And if you don't want to join a paid tier, if you can't afford it right now, I totally understand. Liking the show, sharing the show is super helpful. Join the free tier of the Patreon page, and then you can at least keep up to date. And as things get added to the Patreon, if we get that far, then you're going to be aware of it. And then maybe you'll want to join after that. Maybe financially you'll be able to. Either way, no matter what, I'm so incredibly grateful to you guys. I'm going to stop plugging the Patreon right now because we've done a lot of talking about development the past couple episodes, but thank you all so much. So let's talk a little bit about Ireland. Hopefully this is like just expert podcasting because I got a little bit of a warm-up by accident. I actually recorded a few minutes of this episode and realized I didn't press record on my recorder, which I'm going to double check right now. Okay, yeah, it's recording. I hadn't pressed record on it. I recorded on the camera, and I record my audio separately, and I splice it together. That way I can clean up the audio a little bit, and I did not realize that I didn't press record. Amateur hour. Okay, let's get into Ireland. So first, I want to kind of set the stage, like why am I talking about Ireland, and also where did I go in Ireland? What can you expect? So, in general, I went to Ireland just on a vacation, just with some family. We went, we checked it out, saw the sights, those sorts of things. And so because I was with other people, I didn't make the trip specifically about whiskey. Like it was more so traveling for pleasure, and then I did some whiskey stuff while I was there. So I want to make that super clear from the beginning because that kind of is going to, like I said, set the stage for all the stuff that I'm going to talk about here. I will in this podcast, of course, I'm going to focus on the whiskey stuff, so you're going to get a lot of info about whiskey. But in general, I was over there just to sightsee and also to see some distilleries, those sorts of things. So let's start with where I went, because that's going to kind of set the stage for like where, the distilleries that I saw, things like that. So we did not go to Northern Ireland at all. If you don't know this, there's Ireland, and then there's Northern Ireland above it. Northern Ireland is part of, I believe it's Great Britain, or maybe it's the UK. That whole thing confuses me. If you've never looked it up, it's super confusing if you're from the United States. I believe it's part of Great Britain. That's Northern Ireland. So we didn't go up there. We went to Ireland, which is below it, which is its own standalone country. And we checked out a bunch of different sites there. We went to Cork, we went to Killarney, we went to Dublin, of course, a couple different cities throughout there. And as we're driving around, and we did drive, by the way, brief aside here. Terrifying. It was so scary. We rented a car. I was the driver of my car. There was a separate car with a separate driver, and it was terrifying. But I did figure it out. And actually, when I got home, I found myself, I turned onto my road that I live on, which has no lines. And I turned and I started on the left side for a second. And then I was like, oh, hey, nope, we're not, we're on the left side of the road anymore. Ireland is one of those countries that drives on the left-hand side of the road. So, super confusing. They also have very narrow roads where you'll literally have to stop and pull off the road at some parts. I know you're not here to learn about that, but just something that I found very interesting. So we're driving around, And I see on the highways, I see as we're driving through these little towns, these signs for different distilleries. And I'm like, this is super cool. I had no idea that Irish distilleries had started popping up as much as they have. So there were a lot of small distilleries as we're driving through, but we only had time for one, so I picked Midleton. I picked that on the recommendation of my wife, who had done some research into the different distilleries. She said, I think Midleton is the one that you're going to want to go to. You may not recognize the name Midleton. You might be like, why did you pick that one? Why didn't you pick Jameson? Why didn't you pick Redbreast? I didn't pick those ones because those are part of Midleton. So Midleton actually owns all those different brands. So to name all the big brands they own, Jameson, they own the spot whiskeys like Green Spot, Blue Spot, Red Spot. They own the Redbreast whiskeys, which you guys, if you've been listening for a while, you know I'm a huge fan of. They own the Powers whiskeys, which I also did an episode for that. If I'm not mistaken, we did an episode on Powers John's Lane. Big fan of that. They own Midleton Very Rare, and then they own Method and Madness, which is like a new kind of experimental whiskey that they're doing. They're doing different experiments with it. And when I say they own those, I actually mean like they're all produced by Midleton. So it's not like they own these small brands. It's more so like Midleton just distills all these brands. Like they are Midleton. Midleton is them. It distills all these different brands of whiskey, which I think is a little confusing, but it's kind of like Buffalo Trace, where they distill Buffalo Trace, they distill Blanton's, they make E.H. Taylor, Weller, all these different brands. It's the same kind of an idea. So Midleton outputs an absurd amount of Irish whiskey. And I'm going to talk more about the tour later, but that was the main distillery that we went to, we toured, we checked it out. And if you're familiar with those Irish whiskeys, you're familiar with Midleton, whether you realize it or not. Because I didn't even know the extent. I knew they made Jameson, and I think I knew beforehand that they made Redbreast, I think. But I did not know they made all those different brands. Very interesting stuff. But let's talk about some of the other distilleries that we passed. So I passed some signs for these different distilleries, and I wanted to look them up and talk about them in case you go over to Ireland and you're like, should I go see Midleton? Here's why I would or would not go to these other distilleries. So the first distillery is, of course, Jameson in Dublin. So Midleton produces Jameson, but in Dublin, there's like a quote-unquote Jameson distillery. I think it's since retired. I think it's where they used to make Jameson, if I'm not mistaken. But it's like an experience. It's like a tour that they do. So that's in Dublin, and my wife had done some of her own research. She said, I think you're going to like Midleton more. From what I understand, Jameson might be a little bit more commercial. And in my own research, it did seem that way. So I think because Dublin as a city is enormous compared to the other cities in Ireland, it's much more touristy, it's much more commercial, and so I think that makes the Dublin tour a little bit more commercial, touristy, a little bit less distillery-y, especially if you're used to distillery tours in the United States, especially our smaller distilleries, not the giant big box ones, but even the big box ones in the U.S., like on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, they even are kind of like homey, and you're walking through and seeing their actual operations, whereas I think the Dublin one, in the Jameson Dublin tour, is a little bit more like talking about it. It's more like almost museum-y, I would say, is the impression that I got. And actually, the Midleton tour was a little bit that way, but I'll get to specifics about that. So, speaking from experience with the Guinness tour that was in Dublin, which I did do that, very commercial tour, very much like a museum. I think the Jameson experience in Dublin is similar from what I read online. And I could be wrong about that. This is just online research, but that is what I found online. Then there was Killarney Distillery. We actually stayed in Killarney for a little while, and they have their own distillery and brewery. Unfortunately, they actually just recently went out of business. So I don't know if somebody's going to pick up that mantle or not. I'm pretty sure while we were there, I think our one tour guide said that we were like 3 or 4 days, or maybe it was a week after they closed their doors officially. So they just recently closed their doors, if I'm not mistaken. And so that was very sad. It looked like a super cool distillery. Maybe somebody will pick up the mantle and, buy it and buy all the assets and do it themselves. We'll see. That was another distillery that we passed, though. And then the third one that we passed, we did not go to, was the Dingle Distillery. It started in 2012, and they released whiskey in 2015. So it seems like they, from everything I can find online, they're not sourced. I think they're actually just producing their own whiskey. They produced it in 2012. They sat on it for 3 years or 2.5 years. And then they released it in 2015. So, like I said, looks like they're all produced in-house at Dingle Distillery. They have tours available from what I found online at this moment in time. It was €23. And it looks like, from online, the photos and things, it looks very crafty, very cool. If you like the craft distilleries in the United States that have that nice homey feel where you're really getting a peek behind the curtain, and, they're like small, and that is the impression that I got from the Dingle Distillery, just from looking online. So that might give you a couple of places to look before you go, but there's also like lots of small distilleries popping up throughout Ireland, so look into those as well. I actually did not know this till we got over there and I'm driving around and seeing these signs. And I thought it was really cool because if you don't know a little bit of Irish whiskey history, so Irish whiskey used to be a very prominent whiskey in the whiskey industry, let's say, in the whiskey economy. It had a lot of trouble throughout the years. So there was lots of problems with taxes that really crippled some of the Irish distilleries. There was also trouble when the U.S. had prohibition. The United States was one of the biggest buyers of Irish whiskey, importers of Irish whiskey. And so then when we had prohibition and you couldn't import any at all, it was a major hit for Irish distilleries. So the Irish whiskey economy got really crippled over the course of just these different things kind of just hitting it over and over again. And eventually it almost went out of existence, but a few of the major distilleries came together to form Irish Distillers, and them coming together was actually credited with saving Irish whiskey. If I'm not mistaken, Irish Distillers was the only distillery in Ireland for a while. Let me just fact check myself real quick. I wish I had if you watch Joe Rogan, I wish I had a Jamie to be like, Jamie, look that up. So it was formed in 1966 by the merger of the three surviving major distilleries in Ireland: John Jameson and Son, John Power and Son, and Cork Distilleries Company. That is just from a quick Google search. But they all came together, and I think it was the last distillery in Ireland. If it wasn't the last one, it was the last major one. It got down to just a couple of surviving distilleries in Ireland, and it looked very bleak for a while. But because they came together, they were able to kind of weather the storm together, trim the fat from their distilleries, and just kind of pool their resources to stick together. And because of that, Irish whiskey survived. So for me to be over there and to not know how much it was coming back, it was very exciting to see, because it used to be all these distilleries, used to be a major exporter, a major export for Ireland, and a major producer of whiskey, just all of Ireland. Then it kind of dwindled down until these few distilleries were left, and now it seems like it's back. It seems like the sales are going up. If I'm not mistaken, they're really, really going up, and it seems like people have an interest in Irish whiskey again, so now these distilleries are popping up, which I thought was really, really cool, especially with Dingle not being a sourced distillery, but actually making their own. There's nothing wrong with sourcing at all, but I think it's a really cool sign that now you've got these craft distilleries producing their own whiskey. Very exciting stuff. So those are the distilleries that we drove by. There was also some distilleries that I tried while I was over there. So I didn't actually get to go see the distillery, but I tried some of their stuff. One of them was Killarney, which I mentioned went out of business. Hopefully not for long. We'll see. It wasn't really for me. The stuff that I tried was definitely their sourced stuff, because they have sourced stuff and then they have stuff that they make on their own, which hasn't been released yet, if I'm not mistaken. So I got to try the sourced stuff. I wasn't too big of a fan of it. It just tasted like Irish whiskey. Like, if I'm being honest, like it tasted not bad. It just wasn't anything crazy. I didn't try it side by side with anything, but I would compare it to like a Jameson, like a run-of-the-mill Jameson. Worth trying because it's its own thing, but not super impressed. Hopefully, if somebody picks up the mantle and they get into the stuff that they actually made, that would be really interesting. Then I tried Connemara Irish whiskey. This one was weird because, if you don't know this, Scotch whiskey is often peated, not all the time, common misconception, but a peated whiskey has that really distinctly smoky flavor to it. That smoky flavor comes from the fact that when you malt barley, you have to wet it down, you have to let it sprout, and once it sprouts, you have to dry it out. Usually you'll dry it out with something that won't really leave a trace of flavor. In Scotland, very often, they will dry it out with peat. Peat is like a vegetation mixed with a mud that comes from the bogs, and it packs down in. They have all these bogs in Ireland and in Scotland, and it packs down into this like clump, and then they cut it into bricks, and you can burn those bricks almost like charcoal. So when you're malting your barley, you can burn that underneath it in order to dry out the barley, and that will make this really smoky flavor that actually comes through all the way to the whiskey. Even after you ferment it, you distill it, that smokiness stays around. So that's why a lot of Scotch whiskeys are attributed to being smoky. Well, I didn't even know that anybody in Ireland was doing that same thing. Maybe I'm just ignorant to that. But Connemara is a peated Irish whiskey, and I thought it was really good. I was impressed. It wasn't overly peaty. It wasn't like super duper smoky. If you've had like Lafroig, which is a Scotch, it's very, very smoky, very earthy. The Connemara had some smoke to it. I wasn't doing like an in-depth review of it. I was just in a pub listening to music, trying it. But it had some of that to it, but it also had the nice sweetness. It had the nice honey. It had a little bit of, I think, fruitiness. I felt like at the time, I was like, this is almost fruity. Took a couple of mental notes because I was sure I was going to be talking about it later. But I didn't do like an in-depth review. But in general, positive impression of it. If I see it, I might actually buy a bottle of it. I thought it was very unique and interesting. Then there's also 3 more Irish whiskey brands I want to talk about because my tour guide recommended them. We were on this tour, and the guide was a big fan of Irish whiskey, and he said, Jameson, nothing wrong with Jameson. It's made for the global audience, and it does very well. They export Jameson is everywhere, right? Who hasn't heard of Jameson Irish whiskey? He said, but it's not really made for the Irishman. It's not made for an Irish consumer. He said there's a few brands that I recommend that I think are made more for the Irish consumer. That's Powers, Paddy, and Kilbeggan. So Powers we've already talked about. That comes from Midleton. I've had a whole episode on Powers John's Lane, and I'm a big fan of Powers. If you don't know that, if you haven't listened to that episode, I really like the Powers John's Lane that I have. I haven't tried more from them, but I think it's delicious. It's a higher end bottle, and I think they do a great job. Paddy's I have not had, but I did look it up, and it's available in Ohio, at least on OHLQ, so I didn't buy it because I was like, I can get that back home. And it looks like it's a little bit lower shelf, like it's an inexpensive bottle, so I'd like to try it. I don't know if they normally mix it over there or what they do, but I would like to try it. Then you've got Kilbeggan, which is what I've got sitting right here. Kilbeggan, at least according to OHLQ, I could not find back here. I don't know if it's in other states or not, but I couldn't find it on OHLQ. So I was like, well, I got to buy it while I'm in Ireland. Couldn't find it at any liquor stores. I didn't have a lot of time to go to a lot of different liquor stores. But then I got to the duty-free shop in the airport, and they did have it in Ireland, the Dublin airport. So there were a bunch of different labels of it. I bought this one. This is the triple cask. I kind of wish I would have bought the flagship so I could have tried it. I feel kind of stupid for that, but that's all right. I bought the triple cask because, first of all, the bottle was pretty. Second of all, it is finished in 3 different casks that felt to me like something that would be my palate, just based on reading it. So to give you a crash course on this triple cask, it is matured in 3 different types of casks: bourbon cask, Pedro Jimenez sherry cask. So if you've heard of PX sherry, Pedro Jimenez sherry, that's a type of cask. And then American oak casks. So they take those 3 casks, and then I think they age them separately and blend it together, but it might be that they go bourbon, then PX sherry, then out of the bourbon barrel into the PX sherry barrel, out of the PX sherry barrel into the American oak. It might be that, or it might be that they blend those 3 together. My assumption is the latter, but maybe they actually do it consecutively like that. So this is the bottle that I snagged. Here's what I'm going to say about it. I'm going to actually do a quick tasting of it, like a mini review for you guys, and then we're going to talk specifically about the tour of Midleton. But here's what I'll say about it so far. How do I put this? I think it's good. I think it's very unique, which I give it bonus points for. It wasn't really my taste. It wasn't what I like. I suspect it's blended with some grain whiskey, which grain whiskey is a little different from like a single malt. You can use different grains for grain whiskey, and you usually distill it really, really, really high strength to strip a lot of the flavor out of it. And sometimes it lets the barrel flavor come through, but they do that a lot with some Japanese whiskeys that I've had. They do that with some Scotch whiskeys, and I personally am not too big of a fan of that grain whiskey flavor. I know some people are. There's some very expensive Japanese grain whiskeys out there. So some people are. Me personally, not too huge of a fan. But I think the casks added back enough flavor where I was still impressed by this. I was like, this is really good. But I'm going to do another review of it, so I don't know why I'm telling you all that information. That's just where I'm at starting. We're going to do another review of it, and we're going to see if I still agree with that. I'm going to cut it all out because it is morning, and I have to use my Stay Sober cup. So I'll cut all that drinking and spitting it out. I'll cut that all out for you. Cheers. Okay, that was actually better than I remembered it being. So it does have that grain whiskey flavor, but the grain whiskey flavor shows up a little late. It shows up closer to the finish. And by grain whiskey flavor, what I mean is there's this flavor that's like, it's like white sugar mixed with grain alcohol almost. So if you've had just like vodka, if you just added like simple syrup to vodka, that's kind of the impression that I get from grain whiskey. That's just my palate personally. This does have some of that at the end, and some people I think like it because it's such a simple flavor. It's like simple, clean, delicate, and that's like what those Japanese whiskeys I mentioned shoot for. I've had Nika Coffee Still grain whiskey, I think it's called, and it's very simple and delicate like that, which I think is what they want. For me, not my palate. But this one now, I this time around, I am getting more of those cask finishes, so I definitely get like a hint of an oakiness. The oak doesn't come through as strong as the spice does. There's like a cracked pepper. And then this time, what I didn't get last time that I'm seeing now is I am getting a little bit of like a dried fruit, like a red fruit almost, or maybe even like a darker fruit, like a raisin. I'm getting something like that, which is I didn't get last time. So that is adding a little bit of life to it. I like it way more than I did last time, but like me personally, I'm still going to pick like a Jameson Black Barrel over this, but I still like it. I think it's good. I don't regret buying it. I regret not buying the flagship. I wish I would have bought that. But anyhow, that's my impression that I have. So this is once again Kilbeggan Triple Cask. Little mini review for you guys. Now let's jump into the tour of the Midleton Distillery. Maybe some of you came here just for this. Maybe this is just a little bit of extra information in case you ever go over to Ireland. This is what you can expect from the tour of Midleton, and I don't want to give away stuff that you're going to see because that would suck, but I'm going to walk you through like what to expect, if that makes sense. So first of all, I went on their website, and there's a ton of different tours. So we definitely did the flagship tour. There are a bunch of other ones that maybe would go more in depth. So like the criticisms that I'm giving here, there's some criticisms also. There's some positives because I really enjoyed this tour. I would do it again if I want. I wouldn't do it again, but if I could go back in time, I would do it again. Like, I'm glad that I did this tour. I think it was really, really cool. But also, some of the criticisms that I'm going to give of it might be covered by the other variations of the tour that you can do in Cork. So keep that in mind. So once again, we were at Midleton in Cork, but we were not at the operational distillery, which I didn't know. Once again, I didn't book most of this stuff, but so I was surprised by a lot of it. I'm a little bit of a passenger princess when it comes to travel. So I didn't realize this, but it was not the operational Midleton distillery. It was at the old Midleton distillery, which closed in 1975. So the problem with that is you're not getting to see an operational distillery. That's a downside. You get those on a lot of the Kentucky bourbon trails. You get the actual operational distillery. The plus side was it was very historical and very cool, which you obviously don't get as much of on the bourbon trail because we're not as old as Ireland. We haven't been producing whiskey for as long as Ireland has. So that part of it was very cool. So it's very historical, very museum type feel, but also while it feels like a museum, you are walking through a distillery that was once operational. So you're still getting to see the mash tuns, the stills, which were super cool, but it's not operational. So it starts with a video. The video was cool. It was a little bit commercialized of a video. That's all I'm going to say about it. I don't want to give any more away. And then you walk through the process that you would follow if it was an operational distillery. I loved seeing the historical buildings. That's one of my favorite things when I'm traveling through Europe is seeing these super old buildings and things that, we don't have castles from the 1400s. Now, in the United States. Now, obviously, that's not what this tour was, but that's my favorite part of traveling Europe. So this tour kind of fed into that, where you're in this old distillery, not even operational anymore. You get to see some kind of history going on. You got to see the malting floors. So remember when I mentioned that peated whiskey, they dry out the malt by burning peat underneath it? The malting floor is where they do that malting process. So you get your barley a little bit wet and damp so it wants to sprout. you spread it all out across this floor, and then you have to turn it with shovels and kind of keep it moving around. And there's a specific process to it that even I don't know, but like it's all done on these malting floors. Very cool. We got to see that and see some of the equipment that they would have used. That was very cool. We got to see a mill wheel that they would use to mill down the grains. That was neat because it's turned by water. It's a water-turned mill. Has the huge water wheel that I'm sure you've seen online and in like old school, old-timey shows and movies. That was really cool. And the mill wheel was extremely old. Then you get to see where they distill everything. There's a enormous pot still, which at the time was the largest pot still in the world. That was very cool. There were some little kind of, not cameo, what's the word I'm looking for? Easter eggs, like just little like neat things going on. So one of them is like, you got to see this bell where they would ring the bell if they needed more charcoal to keep the still hot. So you got to actually ring the bell if you wanted to. And then you could see from where we were, you could see the new distillery, which is enormous. This is the operational distillery. You could see it off in the distance. Enormous distillery. And then we also got to see the Method and Madness distillery. So that is at least active. They weren't active while we were there because we were there on a weekend. But it is like a little experimental distillery that they have where they try out different things with like a smaller still, triple distilled, I believe. Yeah, because that's like the Irish whiskey thing, and I believe they're still doing that at Method and Madness. So still triple distilled. Very cool. Very cool to walk through that. That was more of like the craft feel, you know. So the tour overall, I kind of breezed through the things that you saw, but it was very high level. It was very much made with the assumption that you're going to have tourists who aren't that interested in whiskey, in my opinion, that you're going to have tourists who are more so there for the history. But the cool thing about it, and especially our tour guide was awesome. I wish I remembered his name, but he was fantastic. The cool thing was the tour guide was very knowledgeable, so we could ask more in-depth questions. If you're like me and you're a whiskey nerd and you wanted to dig into it, you could ask more questions, and I did ask more questions, and he was super knowledgeable. He had answers for everything that I asked and everything that other people asked, so that was nice. So a little high level, that was my one criticism. Maybe one of the other tours would be a little bit more like nitty-gritty, but it kind of breezed through the high level, which is fine, especially when you're on vacation in Ireland. You know, if you don't want to nerd out about your whiskey, it's a cool tour to go on. I think my biggest pro for it was that it's very historical and very cool to see the history of the distillery, especially being such a major distillery in Ireland. It was really, really cool to see the history of it and see where Irish whiskey came from, where it's headed. That part of it was fantastic. I don't regret going on the tour at all. I would recommend the tour to my friends, and that was once again just the flagship tour. So, jumping back out from the overall tour review for a second and into some more stuff that you do while you're at the distillery. This was actually still part of the tour, is you get a tasting of Jameson versus Green Spot versus Redbreast. At least at the time that I went, those were the three whiskeys you got to try. And they walk you through the differences between the whiskeys. Obviously, those are kind of three not only different whiskeys, but different shelves, you know, of whiskeys, like different price points. And then you get one free drink at the end, which you could do just another tasting of another whiskey. I think Redbreast was the whiskey that you got if you wanted that. Or you could do like a mixed drink, which my wife and my mother-in-law did because they were there with me. Then you get to walk through the gift shop. The gift shop was really cool. They've got distillery exclusives there. It's a huge gift shop. They also just have really cool aesthetic, like there's a wall. You could probably Google it and find a photo of. There's like a wall of all these different whiskeys, which I thought was incredibly cool. And then they also had, like I said, distillery exclusives that you can only get at the distillery. That was very cool. And then the cherry on top. So if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, I'm sure I've mentioned it a lot of times. Big fan of Jameson Black Barrel. It is my dad and I's Christmas whiskey that we do. We do that one, and then we do Watershed's No Chino finished bourbon. But Jameson Black Barrel came before that, actually. That was the first one that we really like. It was our Christmas time whiskey. Big fan of it. So I was trying to decide what distillery exclusive to get, and I couldn't find any that I thought were really amazing. I had a couple that I was like, maybe I'll buy this. Of course, some Redbreast stuff because I love Redbreast. But then I found out you can do a cask strength version of Jameson Black Barrel. They don't label it as a distillery exclusive, but it is. You can only get cask strength Jameson Black Barrel from the distillery. Better yet, you bottle it yourself, which makes it even cooler in my opinion. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. So I did the bottle your own experience. I probably overpaid for it, but it was super cool. I mean, I can't say I overpaid for that experience because it's the only place you can get that experience. It was expensive. I think it was like 120 or 125 euro. But then you get a bottle of cask strength Jameson Black Barrel. You get this whole experience where you get to walk through it. It was really cool, and I was glad that I did it. So that was awesome. So I thought that was very cool that you can do a bottle your own. And yeah, so like I said, so just a couple of cliff notes about it. It was a cool experience overall. It was not quite as homey as Kentucky Distilleries. You know, Kentucky Distilleries, you feel like you're like a part of it. Like they kind of make you feel more like you're at home. Maybe that's just me being an American in a different country, but it did feel more homey at the Kentucky Distilleries, whereas here it felt a little bit more like a museum, a little bit more commercial. Also, another downside is that since it's not operational, you don't get to see like the mash tuns fermenting. And like at bourbon distilleries, it's very common. You get to taste the mash. You dip your finger in and taste it. You also don't get to see the new make coming off of the still. You don't get to thieve anything out of any barrels. Maybe one of the different experiences, maybe you'd get to do some of that stuff, to be clear, especially with the Method and Madness micro distillery going on right there. Maybe you get to do that. But at least the flagship you did not get to. However, when in Ireland, it was still worth seeing. I loved it. I loved how historical it was. I loved it as an experience. I think if you're looking to nerd out into distillery stuff, it's not as immersive as a Kentucky distillery is. But as an experience, it was fantastic. I would absolutely recommend it, like I said. And like I said, maybe some of those there's like some master distiller tours where you get to like do more interactive stuff. So maybe those would be better. And look into those if you're a whiskey nerd like myself and you want a little bit more immersive of an experience. I'd recommend checking those out as well. But if you're just breezing through like we were, we didn't have a lot of time. We just wanted to get the full experience. We just wanted to see the whole distillery. That's what we did. So that is it for the distillery tour portion of this episode. I'm going to round it out. I do have one Q&A from a patron. So if you join the Patreon page, final plug for the Patreon, you get to submit questions that I will answer on the podcast at the end of the episode. You also get to make sure that Whiskey Noobs as a whole doesn't go out of business. So quick plug for the Patreon page there. So this question was, have you had a store pick that didn't live up to the hype and the shelfer actually did better? I'm going to think about that as I drink this glass of Kilbeggan. Wow, that Kilbeggan really is fruitier than I remember. So definitely, I wish I hadn't knocked it before I tried it again. But the first impression, it definitely got the grain whiskey to it. Anyhow, I digress. Have I had a store pick that didn't live up to the hype and the shelfer actually did better? I personally have not. I also haven't had a lot of store picks. The closest I've gotten, I think... Oh! I totally forgot about this one. Actually, I think I have. On OHLQ's Single Barrel Saturday, I bought one. I think it was Wilderness Trail. And I want to be clear, I don't want to diss Wilderness Trail at all because I've heard that their barrel picks are phenomenal. I've heard they have great stuff. However, I bought this on OHLQ. That's Ohio Liquor, OHLQ. It was their Single Barrel Saturday that they put on. And I personally feel as though Ohio's single barrels are getting a little diluted. I think they're throwing a bunch out there and they're going more for quantity over quality. And that is a critique of Ohio Liquor. That is not a critique of Wilderness Trail. I want to be so clear about that because it's the only bottle that I've had from them. I cannot judge them based on one barrel pick. It was good. It tasted good. It tasted like bourbon. It tasted great. But, excuse me, it wasn't anything special, which is what I want from a barrel pick. I want something special. Aside from that, I don't own lots of barrel picks, so I haven't really been super disappointed by any of them. But I do want to say, in general, a note on barrel picks is that I feel like they're getting diluted. I feel like a lot of people are coming out with quantity over quality. And That worries me because I think barrel picks are so phenomenal and cool. I love the idea of it. In my opinion, the way a barrel pick should operate is that it should be so interesting, unique, and tasty that it feels like you're getting an allocated whiskey. And maybe it's not allocated. Maybe it's not from any special brand. But the barrel pick, I feel like you should do such a good job that it feels allocated. It tastes like it's something that if this was a brand of whiskey, if this was something you could just go buy at the store, it would be allocated because it'd be so good. I feel that barrel picks should be that way. And I think as a creator who's going to start doing barrel picks again, and other creators, and then OHLQ as well, and organizations, I think all of us, we have a responsibility to not dilute the market with too many barrel picks that aren't actually unique or good. So all that being said, this is sort of my manifesto for barrel picking because I am just now getting back into barrel picking. I'm doing it for the patrons. The patrons are helping control where it comes from, what distillery, all those sorts of things. And even some of my patrons are going to get to join me on barrel picks. And my singular goal is to be picky as, pardon my French, picky as hell. I know I don't cuss a lot on here, and I know that some people don't consider that a cuss word, but I want to be so picky. I want it to be such a good barrel pick. That is my singular goal with my barrel picks. If I have to ask the distiller, hey, can we try some more samples? Can we get some more stuff? I'm going to do it because I want my barrel picks. I want, if you buy a Whiskey Noobs barrel pick, maybe it ends up not even being your palate or your flavor preferences, but I want you to taste it and be like, that is something I could not get at the store. That tastes distinctively different. And maybe distinctively different isn't like overly unique or have some strange, weird note. Maybe it's just like, this tastes, like I said, like allocated. This tastes like one of the most phenomenal bourbons I've ever had. Or maybe it is super unique. Maybe it's like, this has way more of a cherry or a licorice flavor than I've ever gotten from something. I felt that our pick, it's actually right behind me, of Hard Truth Sweet Mash Rye, I felt that it was that way, where it's like, I've never had a rye taste this way. There's cocoa notes, there's red fruit. Obviously, the Blue Note barrel pick, my first ever barrel pick, we put juicy fruit on the label. I forget what we called it. We called it boozy fruit because I don't want to get sued, but we made the label look kind of like that because it tasted like bubble gum. It was like this really unique flavor, but it still tasted like bourbon, right? So it still tasted good. My inspiration while I'm doing all these barrel picks is really Maker's Mark and their stave finishes, how they come up with these unique names like maple pecan, waffles, s'mores. They come up with these unique names because it tastes like bourbon. It tastes like a really good version of Maker's Mark, but it also has this character to it that is unique and tasty, and that's what I'm going for with my barrel picks. So I didn't mean for that to become a manifesto about it, but it's really important because store picks are becoming so diluted. Ohio Liquors picks, I think, are starting to become diluted, and I hope they steer that ship a little bit. And I know that there's some creators who are just cranking out barrel picks, and I don't think that they're actually that unique. I think they're getting a little bit jaded in just like, this tastes like, I'm just going to pick on Old Forester because it's the first one that came to mind. This tastes like Old Forester. It tastes like pretty good Old Forester. Here you go. It's a barrel pick. I want it to taste like the best Old Forester you've ever had. I'm just picking Old Forester as an example. So all that said, my first barrel pick is going to be Green River. It's probably not out yet by the time this comes out, but if you join the Patreon, you're going to have the first dibs on it. And more barrel picks to come. But I'm going to keep the pace relatively slow because I want to be so picky about it. I want to be picky about which distillers I go with, and I want to be picky about which barrels I pick from those distillers. So probably gonna move relatively slow with those barrel picks in order to make sure they're really, really freaking good. That's the goal. Okay, that's it for my manifesto, and that's it for this episode. Hopefully you guys learned something, especially if you're interested in going to Ireland or Irish whiskey. And I really appreciate the questions from the patrons because I get to actually answer something that I know you guys are wondering out there. So even if you join the lowest tier of the Patreon, the least expensive tier, you get to submit your Q&As as well for the podcast. So thank you guys all for listening. I'm going to round this out, as always, as I always do, with learn to drink, drink to learn. Hi there. If you're still listening to this, then I'm going to assume that you enjoyed the show. So please consider taking a moment to leave a 5-star rating or review and subscribe on whatever platform it is that you're watching / listening to this on. And as always, please, please, please drink responsibly. Cheers.